Welcome to the Accessible Learning Experience, where we help you turn learning barriers into learning opportunities. The correctional setting is one that is often overlooked when it comes to accessibility and inclusive learning opportunities, but it is a setting where these are most needed. On this episode, we're excited to welcome CAS Career and Technical Education and UDL trainer Donald Walker to the podcast. Donald is joined by Jennifer Montag, Director of Disability Services at Marion Technical College, which offers a number of programs that take place in a correctional setting. As Jennifer explains, programs that provide access to educational opportunities in correctional settings can have a positive impact not only on the lives of the individuals enrolled in those programs, but on the community that receives them once their term is over. In essence, we all benefit when those in corrections are able to grow and improve their lives through education. Here are Donald and Jennifer with a truly impactful conversation on accessibility and educational opportunity in corrections.
I'd like to welcome you. My name is Donald Walker. I'm the National CTE and UDL trainer for CAST, and I want to welcome you to our conversation this day. And with me today is Jennifer Montag, Director of Disability Services for Marion Technical College. Jennifer, how are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me here today. This is a great opportunity to share some information about something that's near and dear to me, accessibility and correctional education. Something
exactly.
Very important.
This is a subject matter that I think needs a great deal of attention and isn't often talked about. And so I want to hear more you and less me over the course of our conversation today. So let's begin with this thought. What brought you to the accessibility world to begin with? What is your accessibility story?
Well, Donald, it's really kind of a long story, but I'll try to make it as short as possible. The TL:DR. Too long, didn't read. What really happened was I went to college and I realized that an art degree wasn't really going to make me any money. And so I fell in love with American Sign Language and realized that that was the thing I wanted to do. Went off, got my interpreting degree. They said, hey, there's this college that'll pay you to come and get your master's degree. So I went and got my master's degree in deafness rehabilitation counseling and started working at college university for students with disabilities. Fast forward 20 years, and I landed at another community college where they have correctional education programs, and it's our responsibility as a college to provide correctional education programs or any programs that we have accessibility to those that have disabilities. And so that began my research on what are colleges doing for accessibility in those correctional settings. To summarize, there wasn't much information out there. I realized that what I had to do was I had to create that research. So that became my dissertation topic, and I researched it, wrote about it, and I've actually created some tools that I hope will help other disability service providers in meeting that need to provide accommodations. What I didn't realize was our programs were serving about 350 students at the time, and of that, if you look at the report from the Bureau of Prisons, it's estimated that 38% of those who are incarcerated have disabilities. That means those students are showing up in our classrooms with a variety of disabilities that we as colleges and the correctional setting have to be meeting those students' needs.
There's about 3 or 4 different rabbit holes we could have gone down and may go down with what you just said there. But I would like to make a connection for you on a personal level with accessibility speaks to our most vulnerable populations. I don't know that we think of people who are in correctional facilities as being a part of that vulnerable population. I think sometimes, and this is the editorial according to Donald, that when we think of people who have gone into correctional facilities, they deserve that. That's what they brought on themselves, and so to speak. But when we take disabilities and combine it with an end result of being in a correctional facility, that had to have had a personal connection with you. I mean, what made it so meaningful to you that not only did you want to go and do the research, but then find out there isn't any, and so now you're going to be the creator of said, information. How did that connect to you?
Well, Donald, it's It's the fact that the stigma that exists within our society for people with disabilities and for those who are incarcerated. And then when you have that intersectional identity of being a person with a disability or a disabled person and somebody who's had impacts from the justice system, now you have that double stigma. And after I started going into the correctional setting and meeting with the students that we have, and running into individuals who are incarcerated in the hallways as I'm getting to the education setting, there are clearly individuals who have some significant disabilities that are in this setting that is not conducive to their needs or to meeting their needs. And on a very basic level, if we're talking legal requirements, they still have a right to their civil rights, and their civil right is access. Then we look at it from a humanistic perspective, and the question is, what is this individual who clearly is struggling with mental health challenges doing in the incarcerated setting rather than getting the mental health treatment? And that's a whole nother, if you want to have me back, Donald, for another conversation, we can have a whole conversation about the impacts that correctional facilities are feeling from this influx of individuals with mental health concerns, how mental health concerns and even intellectual disabilities are getting caught up in the criminal justice system. And then we can also talk about what it means to look at corrections as a whole. But that's a whole nother story. What it really means, Donald, is that there are individuals who are in the wrong place at the wrong time and end up in the correctional system. They have disabilities. That does not mean that they are not entitled to their civil rights and they're not entitled to the opportunities to develop and grow. We have research that shows educational opportunities reduces recidivism. So providing this educational opportunity, even when it's seen as the stigma of the individuals that should not be receiving it from society's perspective, we know this works. And if we want individuals to grow and develop and take a different opportunity when they leave than doing what they were doing before, what got you here is not going to get you to success when you leave. You got to make some changes. We have to help provide that foundational change, and that's the education. Education can change people's lives. In fact, it can change families' lives. You provide an education and it affects the entire family. They can all benefit from that education opportunity.
So incredibly on point. As you were talking, you hit a number of thoughts I already had in my head about if we want to think of our prison system as a rehabilitative system, and we're not going to address the needs of the individuals as they make that transition from incarcerated life to, non-incarcerated life, and we don't address that, all we're doing is creating a revolving door for them to come right back again. Matter of fact, when they leave, if we haven't addressed them properly, they're probably worse when they come out than when they came in. And so I think this work that you're doing, this work that you're involved with accessibility in the correctional system is just absolutely fabulous work. And I'm really excited that we're able to bring more light and life to it through this conversation. So let's get down to some of the meat of the matter. What does this kind of training or education look like within the educational system? If you can, through your words and through your own memories, kind of take us into the facility in terms of how you bring accessibility and education to incarcerated persons.
Education within the correctional setting broadly can be any number of things. It can be vocational training, getting training on automotive repair, welding, carpentry, HVAC is some of the training programs that are being offered in correctional settings. At the very minimum is the adult basic education, or GED, general education diploma, that allows people to get that high school equivalency so that they can have that in hand when they go out for a job, because at this point so many jobs require at least a diploma, a high school diploma, or a GED. So those are two very basic, and those are often provided by the correctional setting itself. Sometimes they'll contract with higher education institutions like community colleges to do some of that vocational training, bring in automotive trainers or welding instructors from the community college. There's also then college education, and that is where colleges are presenting education and hopefully educational programs with transferable credits that individuals can complete a certificate, a degree, a program of study, or even just transferable classes that when they leave, they can go to another school, transfer those credits in, and complete a degree or a program. There's also basic life skills classes that are being taught. Sometimes the colleges have a program like social work, where the social work students will come in and teach thinking for a change, or life skills, or anger management, or dealing with communication issues in families. Those are all educational opportunities to help build that rehabilitation for the individuals that are in there. Each one of those is an opportunity for all those who are incarcerated who want to grow and change to have that opportunity. If we don't provide the accessibility for that individual, they're not going to be able to participate. I do also want to mention one of the things that we often forget about is the impact of having the 1990s and the mass incarceration, but also the extended sentencing. So now we have individuals who have been incarcerated for 20 or 30 years that are in their 60s and 70s. As we all know, in the world of disability, it is the only identity that we can all become a member of through accident or illness. So as we age, it is very typical that we then acquire disabilities. We have a large population of individuals who are in the prison system, who are aging, and they are also people with disabilities. So we have to start looking at how are we going to present opportunities for growth and development to every single individual, and especially for those of us that are responsible for our institutions, our colleges and universities, to meet those needs. And so that's really the passion for this, and what I really want people to understand about it.
That's incredibly important that you lift that intersectional piece up, and the fact that being a part of the disability community, for lack of a better term, is something at some point we all can and often find ourselves in. And it can be in such subtle ways. For example, the fact that I wear glasses makes me a member of the disability community because I have this piece of technology on my face to assist me with my vision. Otherwise, anything that isn't within about 2 feet in front of me is going to look like a hot, blurry mess. I mean, we tend to think of disability in such extreme forms and measures, and we also tend to think of disability in terms of what we actually visibly see. What about those invisible forms of disability as well? Going back to when you were talking about mental health or intellectual disabilities, things of that nature. So with that kind of thing in mind, and as programs go into the into the correctional facilities, what kind of tools do you use to bring? What are the accessibility tools that are brought in to assist the persons in the educational experience that they have?
That is such an important question. One of the things that we have to understand is these educational programs that are being provided, the college educational programs, can vary. They can be in person, they can be correspondence, which means, snail mail in, snail mail out. They can be built onto the prison-approved tablet system with their course management system. So there's this variety, which complicates what we do in disability services, because we have to understand what's the format of the class, how are the students going to be completing the class, and then we have to identify the students that need those services and identify the accommodations that'll work for them. and then try to put it all together in a very constrained, highly secure environment where some of the common accommodations that we provide outside on our general campus would not be allowed inside. And it also takes working in collaboration with the college education program and the prison administration. For example, students who are deaf in our correctional education program and know sign language, they obviously need American Sign Language interpreters. And so it's my responsibility to make sure that those students have those services within the classroom, which means identifying interpreters who are interested in interpreting in the correctional setting. That's the first thing. And then who can get badged to go in as contractors so that we can have them going in and out and providing the services. Students who are blind, working with the prison administration to identify what type of materials we can allow the student to have. Can they have Braille material? Is there a limit to the number of pages? Can they have the comb binding that goes on the Braille packet? Just those are very common questions that we have to ask the prison administration and our coordinators of the prison education program at our institutions. Fortunately, and it took a while, it took 6 months or so of continual communication with the prison administration, but I was able to finally get an assistive listening device approved for one of the students that was enrolled in our program who was basically deaf but didn't know sign language. And COVID was awful for the prison setting. We have lots of topics to continue this conversation on, but COVID did bring about the opportunity for us to continue teaching because we teach in-person classes. COVID said, nope, shut down. We were locked out for several semesters. When we were finally able to come back in, it was on Teams. So they set up a system where we could have a classroom with internet access with one staff member going in to supervise, and then our instructors on campus were zooming in on Teams to the correctional site. And so there was this engagement virtually. That opened the opportunity for me to provide real-time captioning in the remote process, where a captioner, let's say in Iowa, connects through the Teams meeting, listens to the conversation through a microphone, and then types out everything that's being said, and it's displayed on the board so that the student who's deaf, doesn't know sign language, can read everything that's going on in class. So those are just some of the things that we've been able to implement. Those that have, from my research, those that have correspondence courses have developed some really innovative ways of completing the interactive process. By law, we are required to interact with the person to identify their disability, the impacts, and the accommodations that would work for them. You're doing that by correspondence, and that is even more difficult than meeting with a student on Teams or Zoom or sitting down in a classroom. And I actually borrowed some of their ideas. They were just fabulous. An application in the new student packet. Hey, bingo, that's how I can identify all these individuals that might need services. Completing the new student orientation and making sure every student there knows about the services, that it is announced in multiple ways. On the outside, we have web pages up for our colleges that display all this information about disability services and how to get accommodations. On the inside, they don't have access to that. So we have to rethink what we do on the outside traditional setting and apply it to this new setting with these very stringent parameters that we have to follow, but to still provide that same information and the same services. And so I'm posting flyers about disability services and how to contact us. I'm having applications filled out. Even for our testing, our placement testing for students, it's announced that if they need the accommodations, we'll provide them for placement testing. These are all things that we have to think about step by step within the correctional setting and make it happen. Whereas on the outside, it's a little more fluid and more automatic. We were able to do a lot of that instantaneously on the outside. On the inside, it now becomes a deliberate process. And some of those tools are just even thinking about what's the program format, who's involved in it, who are the faculty, how do I reach the faculty, who do I talk to at the prison about an accommodation I need to bring in that might violate security protocol, and how do we get that approved? So those are all just some of the tools that I've talked about, and I try to encourage others when I'm talking to other institutions that are bringing a correctional education program on board at their institution. Here are the things that you need to be thinking about, having conversations with the individuals that you need to bring to the table, and that definitely includes the Disability Services Office at the college.
I need to ask, are you familiar with or a practitioner of Universal Design for Learning? Because I just felt like I got a mini course in UDL with everything you just shared. Are you connected to UDL in any way?
I think all of us in disability services, especially in higher education, incorporate some of that into the work that we do, because it reduces the effort that we have to make for all the classes. So if we can get faculty who look at their course design, look at how they're assessing, even thinking about, why do we have time limits on tests? Why do we set those time limits? What is the essential learning requirement of that demonstration of knowledge within a set amount of time? If we can start those conversations, even about assessing, in multiple formats, instead of having everyone write a paper, those that do better in presentations and presenting that information, can we give them that opportunity to demonstrate their learning in a way that works for them? That's the Universal Design for Learning, and it is a great way of reducing some of the amount of work that disability services has to go in and fix. It's not the panacea or the fix for everything. Unless we have a requirement that all faculty learn American Sign Language, we're still going to need to provide accommodations such as sign language or braille materials or large print materials, or ways of doing speech to text for students who have dysgraphia or a writing disability when they're in a testing setting. So there are some things that we have to continue to provide the accommodations for, but if we can knock it out of the park on some things that are just low hanging fruit, that's easy. It helps everyone in the class. It helps everyone in the program and study. That's great. That Universal Design for Learning is a great place to start in assessing the equity of your class. And so instructional designers, anyone who's an instructional designer and is working on Universal Design for Learning within their institution, you have my kudos. That is one of the areas that I would love to see more institutions implement in their settings.
Yeah, that's the thing that I really love about UDL as it was introduced to me when I came on board with CAST, and that it forces you to think of your learners more individually. And when you think about learners from an individual perspective, you can't help but think about them in a more humane way, a more humanistic way, which now that we transition this into an incarcerated situation, that's an even bigger and more important piece to be thinking about. These are humans that we're talking about. And to your earlier point, they're humans who still have every right to their civil rights, both within and when they get out as well. So my heart is just singing over here is when listening to what you're talking about, because it's so liberating. And I think we miss out on what education does. It liberates people and it frees them. And you can free them while they're in their incarcerated situation because you're freeing their mind, Jennifer, and you then free their bodies later on. And now you've got a free, liberated individual who is probably excited about being an addition to the world, as opposed to whatever their circumstances were that brought them in into the correctional system to begin with. You mentioned something in what you were sharing. One of the other wonderful things about Universal Design for Learning, too, is that it really lifts up that concept of a high tide raises all ships. So as you brought more accessibility into the correctional facility, have you seen that concept kind of spill out to other persons within the facility who didn't necessarily need accessibility tools, but they are benefiting from them being there as well, so that even a larger pool of people are learning and benefiting from the educational opportunities in the correctional facility?
I would like to think that, because I haven't done any studies, but anecdotally, I would like to think that that spillover has occurred just by the nature of what we do within the correctional setting. So, as I had mentioned earlier, our program is in person. However, our classes might be an hour and 15 minutes long, but if the student had the class before that and then my class, then it's time for them to leave to go to count. And so they actually have to leave the education facility, go back to their dorms or their cell block, and they will go through the count system to be documented that they're where they're supposed to be. And then they usually go to lunch or dinner, depending on what time of day the classes are. But that means that if I'm giving a test in my class and the students are taking longer, they might run out of time because of the parameters of the educational setting. That in the prison, I can't hold them all for 2 hours if that's what they need to finish the test. So I think our faculty have done a good job of assessing what they're trying to assess and creating ways of doing that might be a paper, or they have to do a team project and present that project that still assesses that they learned the material, but it doesn't have that test factor that impacts them in that limited time. So I think our faculty have done a great job of really looking at what is it that we want the students to know by the time they finish this class, and how can we have them demonstrate that in this setting. And sometimes that means the class at the prison, which is also taught to our general campus students, might have different assignments in a different process just because of the nature of the environment. And so I think that's something that when we talk about educators in the correctional setting, flexibility is the key. I can work with any faculty member who goes into the correctional setting as long as they are flexible and they understand the impact that the correctional setting might have on how we do things. That flexibility, I think, also feeds into that humanistic perspective of working with the students. I wanted to mention Donald because we were talking about the UDL and how that can help. I did a short study of our first year experience class. So we have a class that's first year experience required for all of our business majors. And I instruct one of those classes at each institution. And so I looked at how many of our students are coming in with GEDs. So that's just data that comes in on the applications. We're over 60% of our students in the correctional setting have GEDs. And the first thing I do when I go into that classroom is I tell the students, if you have a GED, you belong in college. Don't let anyone ever tell you that because you got a GED, you don't belong in college. Because I actually, on the outside, previous job, helped prep all of the GED students, and I've seen what those GED tests are, and there is no way that I would want to take a GED test over going to school for 4 years in high school. So I'll go back to high school any day. Don't give me a GED test. So any student who's gotten a GED can do the work in college. And it's just a matter of helping to support them. And when I talk to the students that I work with disabilities in the correctional setting, those that have gotten a GED will share they had a less than desirable K-12 experience, likely from a lack of individualized education or a lack of understanding where that individual is coming from. And we can talk about trauma-informed education or pedagogy, and that really, I think, makes a difference. And I hope that the trauma-informed teaching is moving its way into the K-12 setting and helping the K-12 instructors really reach their students and keep them enrolled and keep them engaged and provide them the supports so that they can continue on and either to transition to employment or transition to post-secondary education. But I hear the stories because I'm dealing with a lot of students who didn't get that education. 10, 15 years ago, trauma-informed anything was not on anybody's radar. And so those students that we're now working with in our correctional settings have that, and they can be a little hesitant about college because their educational experiences, not everyone, but there's a lot of them, enough that I'm saying this is something that we as educators need to understand when we go into the correctional setting, that they already have a little trauma from their previous K-12 experience. And so we throw them into a class that's college without giving them some supports or transition or even the accommodations they need that they might never have gotten in the K-12 setting for their learning disability. That could make the difference in this individual acquiring an education that will facilitate their return to their community to support their family with an employment that needs that degree or certificate.
We are, unfortunate for me, beginning to bring this plane in for a landing, but I want to try and sneak in one more question with you. And that is, as you bring accessibility into the education situation and people become aware of their own needs to be successful in education, are you seeing that translate to those incarcerated persons as they transition out of correctional facilities? Are you seeing that translate into a greater degree of self-advocacy on the part of those persons, that they are now walking out and they know what they need to have in order for them to be successful and work with that recidivism rate?
I wish I could say I have all the data, but within the correctional setting, the way that the students, we know that they've graduated from us, and we're able to track if they're employed after 6 or 9 months, if they're still in our state. Most state correctional systems, we have people who are caught up in the correctional system that are not from our state, so it's harder to document that information when they return back to their home state. I think at least I can speak for our program, and I can't speak for all the correctional education programs because there's such a variety, and there's so many of them doing some amazing work, and they've got, in the correctional setting, they have students who are incarcerated who graduate with a bachelor's, a master's, and are working on their PhD, and they actually become professors within the correctional program. And it is just awe-inspiring when you find these individuals and you hear their stories and what they're doing and the changes they're making. So I think we're doing the work to give them the tools to be, the individual to ask for the accommodations, to stand on their own when they get out, to get a job, for that employment, help their family. I think the difficulty is helping them understand and helping I think it's bigger than helping the individual in the correctional setting understand. I think it's helping our communities understand the importance of the continued support for students, for individuals with disabilities, because we still have areas that we still need to work on for accessibility across our communities, especially in employment, and helping employers see that individuals with disabilities contribute a lot to our community, can contribute to an employer, but also helping the individuals as they return to understand how to ask for those accommodations. And that's something at least in my first year experience class, I do touch on that when you leave, because we talk about career development, and that when you leave, you can ask for accommodations if you need those for your employment. So the goal is, yes, we're doing it, but there isn't any study yet that shows that we're doing that. But hopefully, with the interest in the Pell Grant return to correctional settings and the increase in the number of colleges and universities providing education, somebody will pick this up and say, are we meeting that need, and are those individuals who return to our communities, become part of our society, are they able to use what they learned, request the accommodations they need, and get jobs that fulfill their need and support their family?
I wish my research for my own doctoral program would take me in that direction, because that sounds like some fabulous and fascinating work to do. As we conclude, how can people stay in touch with you? How can people find out more about what it is that you're doing, and connect to your personal research for the doctoral work that you've done?
I've created a website with free resources for college disability service providers, but it's for anybody who wants to learn a little bit more about the correctional education program. It is JKM Weebly, so it's jkmresearch.weebly.com. And my email is out there, and I'm hoping, I'm in the middle of another follow-up research project for my dissertation that takes my dissertation from just community colleges to all of the colleges and universities that are providing education now that the Pell Grants have been released. And we're looking at what is being done for disability services. Has anything changed in the 2 years since my dissertation and now that the Pell Grants are released? And so I'm hoping that we're going to have more information, but anyone who's in the correctional education or in the college disability services will be receiving a survey about that so that we can actually document that, and hopefully that will get published in the next 9 months.
Well, we're going to have you back because this amount of time isn't enough for a lot of what you shared, and I know that there's plenty more, but I would like to thank our Director of Disability Services for Marion Technical College, Jennifer Montag, for joining us today, for joining me today. This has been a fabulous conversation, and I applaud you for the work and for anyone else who's joined you in this work. And I just ask that you stay encouraged and keep doing this fantastic thing for people who really need it and are benefiting from it greatly, I know. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Donald. I love having a soapbox on this, and there's a whole group of us that are starting to build this awareness. So thank you for the opportunity, and thank you to all of my colleagues across the country who are doing the same work. It's work that needs to be done. Disability services is difficult. You would think it's impossible, but it's not in the correctional setting. It can be done.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Accessible Learning Experience, brought to you by the National Center on Accessible Educational Materials at CAST. You can find us on the web at aem.cast.org. There you'll find show notes with links to all of the resources mentioned on each episode. Thanks again for listening, and remember, accessibility is everyone's responsibility. The contents of this podcast were developed under a cooperative agreement with the U.S. Department of Education. However, those contents do not necessarily represent the policy of the U.S. Department of Education, and you should not assume endorsement by the federal government.